Who is to blame for what is happening in Afghanistan? There's actually a very simple answer from the Daily Mail. Biden's approval rating plunges 7 points to its lowest ever, of 46% after Kabul falls to the Taliban. Voters say his handling of the Afghan crisis is the worst of any president since the war began. The images we're seeing in Afghanistan right now are pretty horrifying. Some people in the streets. There's this one ridiculous image that I don't know if it's real or not, but it looks ridiculous. It's the UN Sustainable Goals painted on a wall as the Taliban aims a gun at civilians. This is Joe Biden's fault, my friends. What is happening right now in Afghanistan is Joe Biden's fault. But hold on. I'm not saying Afghanistan as a whole, the entire crisis, is Joe Biden's fault. I'm saying what's happening right now. And anybody who denies it is playing partisan politics because they're concerned about what this means for 2022 and 2024 and for a country that's very, very heavily divided. But let me explain something very simple. George W. Bush started this war. The fault lies with him. He was president. It was his administration. It was the people around him. And it was that era, I suppose, where they decided to begin nation building in Afghanistan. That started the problem. I can blame all of what Afghanistan is on the Bush administration, but Obama expanded it. Obama presided over it for 2 terms, including Joe Biden. So don't come to me and say Trump's fault for negotiating a withdrawal for a war that we should never have been involved in. Or I should say, you want to do mark and reprisal or whatever it's called to go after Al Qaeda. I understand that. But staying in nation building was a mistake. Joe Biden was the vice president under Obama. He was part of the administration. So after Bush, yes, of course, he started it. I think most of the fault for the entirety of the fiasco is on him. You still had Obama. You still had Biden. And then Trump says, I'm going to put an end to it. Trump negotiated a deal. The idea, my understanding, is that the Taliban would stay away from the provincial capitals, from the major cities. And what happened was, at least according to one assessment I read, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, Joe Biden, the administration, pulled air support. And that is the centerpiece of American military strategy and what we had trained the Afghan security forces to do. Now, Joe Biden said something in his speech that, we can't have U.S. men and women fighting a war that the Afghans aren't willing to fight themselves. And I agreed with that idea. And then I listened to some of the opinions of other people who are, active in Afghanistan, actual veterans, as well as some other comments from those who have been tracking what was going on in Afghanistan. And what many have criticized Biden for is that when the U.S. was pulling out under Biden's strategy, they basically said to the Afghan security forces, you will not have any support for us. We're out. The Afghan security forces then were willing to fight. And apparently many are still actively guarding the Kabul airport. But when you remove, it's like, hey, when you fight, make sure you keep your guard up, right? You tell them to do that. Then you say, oh, and by the way, we're now barring you from having your guard up. They're going to be like, what am I supposed to do? I'm not going to fight. I don't know how to fight. So certainly there were many people who are fleeing. Certainly you can make that argument. But there's also the argument that strategically, it was a massive and major blunder. And as pollees are saying, the voters, this is the worst handling of Afghanistan under any single president. Even Donald Trump with his withdrawal of the forces. But Americans didn't want to be in Afghanistan. Let's talk about what's going on. And I want to talk to you about the psychosis, the absolute psychosis and derangement that is the establishment cult. These people are not well, my friends. That famous quote that I forgot the guy's name. It's that if people are really so dumb that they need someone to guide them and rule them, isn't it true then that those who would guide and rule are also they're people too? They're also probably dumb, right? The general idea is everybody thinks they're the arbiter of truth and morality. And that's why these people fight for power, because they're narcissists, they're sociopaths, they're psychotic. They think only I can save the people. Have you seen my music video, Will of the People? Google it. Tim Cast, Will of the People, original song. That's basically what it's about. All of these people who keep saying, I'm the only one. It's like Dr. Doom. I'm the only one. And then what happens? A disaster, death, chaos, because you do not know. You do not know. I bring you now to Reuters, with one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. Reuters reports UNICEF quite optimistic after Taliban comments on girls' educations, officials say. Oh, what was that? There was that one guy in the Biden administration saying, we want to see the Taliban have women in government. Oh, okay. This country is going to collapse. The next few months are going to be worse than most of you probably realize. Now, I'm sure, I shouldn't say most of you, some of you. I'm sure most of you think it's apocalyptic. There was a tweet I saw that basically breaks down exactly what comes next. Is the Taliban going to be able to run the Afghan central bank? Are they going to be able to deal with interest rates and currency fluctuations? No. The governor of their central bank fled. Not that I'm a fan of central banking or the Federal Reserve. The point is the system in place will crumble. There is nothing holding it together. Now, I'm not saying that it's good that you have arbiters of morality and law. I'm saying that I'm a reformer. And I always have been. You don't want to just destroy the system. You've got to work through it to change it so that people don't suffer and that you succeed as you move through these trying times. Now, with so many fleeing in Afghanistan, do you really think the Taliban's going to be able to maintain the status quo? Well, of course not. Nobody expected the status quo to remain. But no, I'm talking about the delivery of food. I'm talking about plumbing systems and electrical systems. TV, do you think they're going to be able to maintain these things? People are getting out. There's not going to be a functioning system under the Taliban. It just will not happen. Maybe I'm wrong. I just really don't see it. When you see how many people have fled the country, diplomatic ties being severed and disrupted overnight. Why? I think it's fair to say the Taliban immediately violated the peace agreement and Joe Biden did nothing. So it's one thing to say it's Trump's fault because he negotiated this peace deal. Well, I mean, Trump's deal was that the Taliban wouldn't be taking these cities, right? In which case, Trump would have retaliated and said they're in violation of the peace treaty and airstrikes, perhaps. As I mentioned before, we've had veterans on the Timcast IRL show who have said a small contingent of American leadership with some drones, and you will maintain the peace. And the Afghan government can maintain because you've got the air superiority and the air support. Apparently, it was all just taken away. Let me show you this from Christian Christensen. He says, Swedish staff left the embassy as their Afghan colleagues worked. Then they refused to answer calls from the Afghan staff and even blocked their official email accounts, left the country. Jan Albert Hootsen, I wonder, is a press freedom journalist for TROUW, America Mag, says, from Dutch newspaper NRC, when Afghan employees of the Dutch embassy in Kabul arrived at the office on Sunday, they were flabbergasted to find that the Dutch had all left without telling them anything. They just left. It's not just America. It's everybody. This ridiculous idea that there was going to be some kind of, the UN's idea of this weird nation building thing they did in Afghanistan. They didn't understand the Afghan people. They didn't understand their culture. And you know what I see? The Taliban is awful. They're awful. They're really awful. I don't like it. It's theocratic fascism. It is a stripping of individual rights. I do believe in gender equality of opportunity. Now, over in Afghanistan, the Taliban doesn't. But here's the thing. I'm not an authoritarian. I don't think we should be showing up with guns and forcing people to do what we want them to do. Now, within reason, because I wouldn't say that I'm an anarchist. Certainly within the confines of a government, there is an authority that we follow, though I'm much, much more libertarian in that, if there's, I think you solve more problems through negotiation and cooperation than conflict, and conflict arises when you have to. And you can see what happens in the U.S. with, police breaking doors down. That's more authoritarian. And sometimes you have to because suspects are violent. When it escalates the level of violence, it's adhere to the authority or else. Here's what I'm saying. I don't like what's going on in Afghanistan. The idea of what Afghanistan was before we went in there with the Taliban and Islamic, fascistic, theocratic, whatever you want to call it, not a good thing. But who are we to go into Afghanistan and just take over and just be like, we're taking over? Because imagine it this way. What if they came here and just took over and said, your way of life is wrong? The way I see it is, we are America. We have our borders. We are not an empire, or at least we are, but we're not supposed to be. We're supposed to take care of our country. Instead, we become world police, where we walk into this country and say, now you will live the way we want you to live. But these people grew up in a different world. They don't want to live this way. So the UN thinks they can impose these ideas, many of which are ridiculous, on a people that have no understanding of these cultural concepts, nor have they been raised to understand what much of this philosophy is. They can't even teach the people jumping jacks, or what is it called? Side straddle hop, whatever. And they think that when after 20 years, we're going to say, have a nice day, and democracy kicks in. No. I will say, though, I the more I read and the more I look into this, the more it seems to me that this could have been a success. It's the craziest thing, right? I think the war was bad from the get-go. I think we shouldn't have stayed for nation building. And I think, leaving was the right call. But the more and more I read, the more I'm like, is it possible that the collapse is just the fault of Joe Biden? And I think it is. Trump negotiated a peace agreement that was to be enforced. Biden is not enforcing it. He's sending more troops in now. So what happens next? The fighting is going to erupt again. We're going to try and reclaim these cities, and then it will be like Syria. The cities will burn. There will be bullet-ridden buildings. It's going to be a disaster. Joe Biden I'm glad he left. I do think that the Taliban still would have made moves under Donald Trump, but I don't think it would be nearly to this degree. And I think Trump would have retaliated and potentially held them off. I genuinely believe that. Because I look at Joe Biden, sleepy, creepy Joe. I look at what Matt Zeller said. He was on MSNBC. It's this viral video. I talked about it several times the other day, where he said they never planned for these contingencies. They kept going to the Biden administration saying, listen to us. And he said the Biden administration was more concerned about looking bad than doing the right thing. I am unsurprised. Here we are from the Hill. Taliban fire into crowd, beat protesters. There's a video apparently of people waving the Afghan national flag, and the Taliban's like, nope, not anymore. It's amazing that you had relative stability for a long time now with a very small contingent of U.S. troops, and Biden would not enforce. I mean, he had 14 months, right, to plan for this. Oh, I know what you're saying. No. That was Trump when Trump was president. Hold on. Joe Biden was running for president. He knew what Trump was doing. We all did. We all knew that Trump had negotiated this deal. We all knew that Trump invited Taliban leaders to Camp David, and the media went nuts over it. Joe Biden saw that and said, I want to be the president when that goes down. The buck stops with him. So here's Trump, baby. Trump slams Biden's Afghan withdrawal shambles, defends his deal with the Taliban, and says warlords could now have thousands of U.S. hostages in Hannity interview. They say former President Trump on Tuesday claimed he threatened to launch strikes against the chief Taliban negotiator's home village if insurgents failed to observe the terms of a peace deal, as he blasted President Biden's handling of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. It's not the concept of leaving, he told Fox News, Hannity. It's the way they withdrew. It was not even possible to believe. The former president has kept up a running commentary on the unfolding crisis in Afghanistan, condemning Biden's handling. Biden and his officials have in turn said their hands were tied by a deal struck with the Taliban by Trump. But the former president said he made clear in negotiations there would be consequences if Mullah Abdul Ghani Barada, the Taliban's political chief, failed to stick to the terms of their deal. We had a very strong conversation. I told them up front, look, before we start, let me just tell you right now that if anything bad happens to Americans or anybody else, or if you ever come over to our land, we will hit you with a force that no country has ever been hit with before. A force so great that you won't even believe it. And your village, and we know where it is, and I named it, will be the first one. I do not think they would have made these moves if Trump was president, because Trump, come on. I love their Trump defenders that are like, Trump wouldn't have sacrificed the lives. Trump would have done, sorry, no. Trump is a lot of things, but Trump is not I would say to a great degree, not a pushover. He's the kind of guy who goes, excuse me, no, listen, no. The joke we always make is that if when Andrew Yang was at the debates in the Democratic primary and they cut his microphone off, he's just mouthing, no words coming out, and he just looks around. What do you think Trump would have done if they cut his mic off? You'd see him frantically waving and yelling, and then he'd look around, realizing it's cut off. He'd lean over to the other person's mic and go, "Excuse me, my microphone is off. No, my microphone should not be off. No, listen, you listen." He did it. He wouldn't stop interrupting Hillary Clinton. Now, I get it. Interrupting someone is not firing an airstrike on them. But do you really believe that Trump would say, "Do not take the cities or we will bomb you"? And then he'd be like, "Oh, no, I can't bomb them." No, Trump would be like, "Airstrike." Donald Trump ordered a commando raid. Or I should say he signed off on it. One of the first things he did as president, similar to what we saw with Obama. The commando raid in Yemen is believed to have killed an 8-year-old girl. It's not the same, American girl, mind you. It's not the same as with Obama, where we had the confirmation with Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki. There is just news reports saying that they believe this girl was killed in the raid. I will say, hard to know what's true when it comes from the media. Hard to know what's true. The point is, I do not see Trump as being a pathetic pushover. And I think the Taliban also agrees. Trump was, look, for better or for worse, he was viewed by the world as a madman with his finger on the trigger. But Barada flew back to Afghanistan on Tuesday and is among the leading contenders to head the new government. Trump's comments come after the Taliban, hours after they promised their rule would be moderate, started using whips and sharp objects to beat back Afghans crowded along the walls of the Kabul airport. One man was photographed with tears streaming down his cheeks, his face contorted in anguish as he saw his fellow Afghans being whipped. Women were filmed reaching their hands through iron railings toward U.S. troops while screaming, "The Taliban are coming," in footage being circulated on Afghan social media accounts this morning. Meanwhile, more footage revealed crowds hard up against concrete perimeter walls on the airport's military north side, with shots being fired over the heads of men, women, and children to keep them back. Joe Biden's approval rating is its lowest point ever, at least according to one poll, mind you. I always, try to show contrasting polls. It is not its highest ever according to Civics, and I want to make sure this context is very clear. Civics has him at 49 disapproval, and his approval rating is 44. His approval rating has been lower before. It's been 43. So it's been slightly lower before, and his disapproval has been 50 at one point. So it's not the worst ever been according to Civics. Some polls do have it as at his approval at its lowest ever. It's Biden's fault, and this is kind of shocking when we're now seeing things unfold, and we're now starting to get information from the former Trump administration and from the Biden administration. We see that Biden is MIA. Apparently, I think it's the NSA saying that he hasn't even met with other world leaders, or someone said that. Biden apparently isn't talking with other world leaders about what's going on. He's nowhere to be found. He's not answering questions. Jen Psaki goes on vacation. Kamala Harris says, "I'm not going to talk about this. I'm focused on other things." And then Trump comes out and says, "Our plan was that we would keep the cities, the Afghani government would stand, and the Taliban would stay away. Otherwise, we would strike them." So how is it that when the Taliban started walking in and we started seeing the Afghan security forces handing over their weapons, Biden did nothing? He did nothing? At that point, couldn't you have been like, drone strike the military bases? Get the weapon? Nothing? Just sit back and watch, put his feet up, and then says, "My hands are tied by Trump." Yeah, well, people don't believe it. That's why his approval rating went down. People don't believe it. It is you. And you know what's scary? Let me show you this. So his approval rating has gone down by 1 point in the past week or so. Biden's disapproval has gone up by about a point in the past week or so. Or actually, it appears to remain mostly static. You can see in the image, it goes up a little bit, but not enough to actually get a full percentage point. What do you think the Democrats think of Joe Biden? 87% approve. It was back in, what do we got here? When did it change? Approval dropped from 88% to 87% in July. So Democrats don't care about Afghanistan. No, they're just blaming Trump. Republicans always hated Joe Biden. So his disapproval's been 93% and 94% among Republicans. But among independent voters, we see that that 1% uptick following the Afghan crisis. And that's where that bump up comes from. Independent voters over time, as you can see, have grown to disapprove of Joe Biden quite a bit. His approval went up, and now it's starting to sink. Among independent voters, Joe Biden's approval rating is 34%. That matters. 2022. We're a year away from these elections, just about a little bit over a year away. That's an eternity when it comes to election cycles. But this matters. Democrat voters are going to vote Democratic. Independent voters. Now that's interesting. Who are they going to vote with? Now, I don't know if we're going to see a major red wave, perhaps, simply based on gerrymandering and state control by Republicans. Republicans control many states at the state houses. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I can say that the independent voters are the ones you want to watch. Why? They're not the hard partisans. They're not overtly like, yay, Trump or yay, Biden. They're just kind of like, I mean, Biden sometimes, Trump sometimes, I don't know. And they're looking at what's going on and they're like, Biden is doing a terrible job. And he is. You know, I've said it before, I'm politically independent. I voted Republican this last time because I felt that Joe Biden was bad. But more importantly, I don't like voting against people. I saw Donald Trump's second term agenda, and it included things like school choice and opposing critical race applied principles. And I said, yeah, I'll take it. And withdraw from Afghanistan. Absolutely. I think he would have done a way better job, in my opinion. But I'll tell you right now, I don't know if I'm going to vote Republican or for Trump if he were to run again. I don't know if I'll support the Republicans in 2022 because you can't just come to me and say Democrats are bad, therefore support Republicans. No, I'm sorry. You know why? Because I'll tell you what's going to happen. The Republicans take the House and then they sit on their hands. You think the Republicans are going to engage in any kind of real subpoena power or anything against Biden? Do you think they'll actually move to impeach Biden? Oh, Marjorie Taylor Greene keeps trying. And we've seen the progressive left. They kept trying against Donald Trump. And then finally, the establishment Democrats got on board and tried to impeach Trump twice. Oh, I'm sorry. They did. They did impeach Trump the first time. They couldn't convict him. And then we have, so now we have Republicans running and they want to take the House back. And I'm just like, why should I care? What are you going to do? You had it in 2016, but there's one difference. A wave of populist, populist Republicans who represent something different from the old guard. Maybe that's worth supporting. I'm also interested to a certain degree in the Mises Caucus, but not entirely convinced. Sorry. As much as I do respect them, the problem I have is the Libertarian Party's overwhelming support for critical race applied principles. Joe Jorgensen's support of anti-racism, which is a racist ideology that advocates for discrimination based on race, and they call it anti-racism. And then you have other Libertarian Party accounts posting things like, just very much in support of critical theory. Because they're just so about personal freedoms, they don't care about social cohesion. I am not a right-wing hardcore libertarian. I am libertarian on the political spectrum, and I lean left in terms of cooperative versus competitive markets. Rather centrist, I would say. But I like Dave Smith. I think he's a smart guy. I think he's got a good head on his shoulders, and we're going to be talking with him this week. It's this Friday, I believe. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. I don't know if the Republicans have it for me. I don't know. But the challenge comes then when people say, if you don't support the Republicans, the Democrats win. And that's a good point. It's tough, isn't it? It's like rock in a hard place. I don't like the Republicans. They won't do anything, but at least they're a roadblock for the Democrats. I'm sorry. I get it. But at a certain point, I'm just like, how about we do something? How about we vote for people who will do something instead of just saying, I'll take the roadblock for another 2 years. Sorry. Now, if they can't and they haven't do anything, why vote for them? If there's an opportunity to vote for people who will do something, do it. And that's why I'm saying, people like Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, for instance, they do things. Marjorie Taylor Greene certainly does things. Lauren Boebert, for instance. So maybe if there are more people who are running as Republicans, but represent something, something more freedom-based and a pushback to the Democrats, it's worth voting for regardless if it's Republican or not. And that's what you got to watch for. So watch for the primaries. Make sure you're supporting the people who will actually fight for your belief, for your values, and stand up in Congress. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all then.